The rain on Tavares 5 came down in slanted sheets, driven hard by winds off the Black Sea, carrying the tong of rusted metal, wet stone, and salt into every corner of the fringe market. The cobbled streets sloped toward the docks, so water ran in shallow currents between the stalls, sweeping along bits of trash, wind-shredded leaves, and the occasional fish scale left from the morning's catch. Tarps hung low over the market stands, patched with mismatched cloth, their edges snapping in the wind. Beneath one sagging shelter, a woman crouched on the damp planks, her knees tucked under her, her arm wrapped tightly around a small child. Lyrian's violet skin glistened with rain, silver hair plastered to her face. She held what was left of her ceremonial silk, a deep wine-red strip from a garment that had once been a mark of her standing, woven fine in the Zerini Allen style. It clung to her now, soaked through, a stubborn remnant she had kept for months as if it could still mean something. She draped it around her daughter's thin shoulders, the fabric heavy and cold. Sel didn't complain, just leaned closer, eyes following every steaming plate of food that passed within sight. The vendor across from them ladled broth into bowls, without looking up from his work. His stall smelled of bone stock, onion, and pepper leaf, the scent wrapping around Lyrian like a reminder of everything she couldn't offer. She had no credits left, no trade goods. Pride kept her from begging. Pride had kept her alive this long. But Sel's lips were pale, her breath faintly visible in the wet chill. Lyrian rose slowly, stepping to the counter. "Silk," she said simply, voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. She unpinned the strip from her daughter's shoulders, folding it once, letting the weight of the fabric speak for itself. The vendor's eyes flicked to her bare feet, the mud clinging to her calves, and then to the silk in her hand. Without a word, he plucked it from her and dropped it into a crate beneath the counter. A moment later, he slid a steaming bowl across. The wood, no thanks were given. None was expected. She crouched again, pressing the bowl into Sel's hands. The girl's fingers curled around it as if it were fragile, her face lowering into the steam. She breathed in deeply, eyes half closing in relief before taking the first small sip. That was when Cale Rohr stopped. He had been cutting through the market on his way home from the docks, collar turned up against the rain, satchel strap digging into his shoulder. His work was tedious cataloging manifests, checking seals, but the walk through the market was his quiet habit, a way to measure the colony's pulse in faces and empty stalls. Lyrian caught his attention not for her beauty, though she had it, but for the way she positioned herself between the wind and the girl, for the way she refused to look around for help. He stepped closer, boots splashing in the gutter water. "Another," he told the vendor, placing 2 credits on the counter. Lyrian's head lifted sharply. "We don't take charity." "It's not charity," he said. "I'll drink it myself." The vendor was already filling the second bowl. Cale handed it over without ceremony. Lyrian hesitated, then took a sip before passing it to Sel. The girl's hands shook from the heat and the cold. "The rain won't let up soon," Cale said quietly. "There's a shed by the docks. Roof solid, floors dry." Her eyes narrowed, weighing the offer. "And what would you want for it?" "Nothing." "Now," he said. "If you take it, you can return the favor later." Sel's voice broke in, soft but curious. "Does it have a floor?" Cale looked down at her and gave a small nod. "Off the ground. Warmer than here." Lyrian's mouth pressed into a thin line, but she didn't say no. Not yet, and that was enough for him to know the door wasn't entirely closed out by morning. The rain had not eased. It had deepened into a steady, unbroken curtain, blurring the edges of buildings and turning every alley into a shallow canal. The gutters along the market lane overflowed, spilling brown water across the stone. Cale walked the same route he always did, coat pulled tight, the small brass shed key tucked into the inside pocket where it stayed warm against his chest. He told himself he was carrying it out of habit, not for any one person. Still, his eyes scanned each stall, each awning, searching for a flash of silver hair or the small shape of a child. The tarp where they had been yesterday sagged empty, its ropes creaking in the wind. The broth vendor was packing crates into a handcart. Cale stopped. The woman, violet skin, silver hair. With a child. You see them? The man shrugged without looking up. Came early. Left before the crowd. Didn't say where. Cale moved on, telling himself that was the end of it. But his feet turned toward the narrow lanes behind the market instead of the docks. The air back here was heavier, the smell of wet wood mixing with stale spice. He found them at the far end of a flooded alley, crouched under the shallow overhang of a shuttered shop. Lyrian's arms were wrapped tight around Sel, shielding her from the wind that cut between buildings. The girl's hair was plastered to her cheeks. Their tunics clung to them in the cold. You didn't take the shed, Cale said. Lyrian looked up slowly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes stayed sharp. We didn't know if it was real. It's real, he said. Dry roof, wood floor, near the docks. No lock on the inside, only out. It's not much, but it's better than this. She adjusted Sel's sleeve without looking at him. Why? You said yesterday you don't trade for nothing. Maybe I don't like seeing someone stand in the rain when there's an empty roof. Going to waste? Sel tilted her head. You don't look like someone who helps people. Cale almost smiled. That's because I'm not in the habit. Come on, it's closer than you think. He didn't wait for a direct answer, just stepped back into the rain at a pace slow enough for them to follow without feeling chased. The sound of their bare feet splashing through puddles fell in behind him. The shed sat pressed against the side of a warehouse, the boards swollen but solid. The air smelled faintly of tar rope and dried kelp from the cargo inside. Cale pushed the door open with his shoulder, stepping in first. The dim space was dry, except for one damp corner near the threshold. The wall that backed onto the warehouse held a faint, steady warmth. Lyra stepped in cautiously, scanning each corner. She knocked on the wall, checked the door beam, and tested the floor with her palm. Sel followed, crouching to press her hand flat against the boards. It's warm, she said, as if that were the only measure that mattered. You can stay here, Cale told them. No one uses it unless we're overflowing with cargo. If you hear a knock 3 fast, 1 slow, it's me. Anyone else? Don't open. Lyrian's gaze narrowed. And when the dockmaster sees us? He won't. He has bigger problems to watch. Cale set the key on the low beam beside the door. Keep it. No one else has one. Sel ran her fingers over the grain of the floor. Mama, we can sleep here without hearing the wind. Lyrian didn't speak for a moment, but her hand tightened on the girl's shoulder. When she finally looked up, there was no thanks in her voice, only a measured nod. For now. Cale stepped back to the door, rain spilling in around him. I'll bring you something dry for your feet tomorrow. The stones outside the docks, cut worse than these. She met his eyes. And what will you want for that? Nothing, he said, without flinching. You already paid me back. He left before she could ask what he meant, the door shutting with a muffled thud behind him. Outside, the rain drummed steady on the roof, but inside the shed, the air stayed warm and still. For the first time in weeks, Sel curled up without shivering. Lyrian sat near the wall, eyes fixed on the vent above, listening to the rain and realizing she hadn't thought about leaving since she stepped through the door. The rain softened to a mist by the time Cale returned the next morning, his boots tracking a faint trail of wet across the dockside boards. 3 quick knocks, one slow exactly as he'd told them. The shed door cracked open, just enough for Lyrian's eyes to appear in the gap, silver hair damp at the ends. "I brought what I promised," Cale said, holding up a small sack. Inside were 2 pairs of dock boots, worn but whole, and a folded length of heavy canvas. "Boots for the stones," he said. "Canvas for the floor, so it stays dry even if the rain pushes through." Sel was on her knees before Lyrian could answer, already pulling the smaller pair from the sack. She shoved her feet into them and stood, wobbling a little. "They make me taller," she said, the faintest flicker of a smile crossing her face. "That's how good boots should feel," Cale replied. Lyrian's hands smoothed the canvas across the boards, her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't look up. "You said no trade." "I meant it," Cale said, "though I might ask for help later." Her eyes lifted to his, wary. "What kind of help?" "Dock work," he said simply. "I keep track of crates coming in. Sometimes I need another set of eyes to note markings or counts when I'm on the far side of the yard. It's not heavy work." Lyrian sat back on her heels, considering. Work means being seen. It also means fewer days when you have nothing to give. She didn't answer immediately, but he didn't press her. Instead, he crouched to unroll the canvas, smoothing the creases with the flat of his hand. "This will keep the cold from coming up through the floor. Put the blanket on top. It'll hold the heat longer." The air inside the shed was warmer. Already, the faint stove heat from the warehouse wall seeping in. Sel crouched, running her fingers over the canvas like it was something rare. Lyrian's gaze lingered on Cale, searching for the hook in his offer. "You walk the market every day," she said at last, "but you work the docks. Why take the long way home?" Cale sat back on his heels, his expression unreadable. "Because the market shows me what the ledgers can't. Ledgers tell you what's coming in. The market tells you what's missing." "And what's missing now?" "Dry places," he said without hesitation. "For people who don't have anywhere to go." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded once small, but enough for him to know she understood. "I'll be back after my shift," Cale said, rising. "You can tell me then if you want the dock work." When the door closed behind him, Sel sat cross-legged on the blanket, tugging at the tops of her new boots as if testing that they'd stay. "Mama," she said quietly, "I think he means what he says." Lyrian didn't answer right away. She was thinking of the last time she'd trusted someone's offer and how much it had cost her. But her reply, when it came, was softer than she intended. "Maybe." That afternoon, the rain began again, steady and cold. But Lyrian realized she wasn't watching the weather anymore. She was watching the door. The day Cale asked her to come to the docks dawned without rain, a rare pale light stretching across the narrow streets. The air smelled faintly of salt and the sour tongue of fish oil drifting in from the sea. Lyrian was sitting near the shed door when the knock came, 3 fast, 1 slow. She opened it to find him already in his work coat, ledger tucked under one arm. "If you're willing, today's the day," he said. "Just counting and marking crates. No heavy lifting." Sel appeared behind her mother, one boot in her hand. "Can I come?" Cale glanced at Lyrian. "If you want her to." "The docks are loud, but not dangerous." Lyrian hesitated, her eyes narrowing in thought. She'd spent months avoiding the open spaces where too many eyes might linger, but Sel's expression held quiet hope. Cale wasn't pushing, just laying the choice in front of her. "We'll come," she said finally. They walked together. Cale's long strides slowed to match theirs. The closer they got, the sharper the smells became. Wet rope, tar, old wood. Ships loomed over the piers, hulls streaked with rust and barnacle scars, gulls wheeling overhead. Dockhands in oilskin coats moved crates with slow, deliberate precision. Calling out numbers over the slap of water against the pilings. Kale led them to a stack of fresh cargo beside the main warehouse. He handed Lyrian a short piece of chalk, tapping the burned registry marks on the wood. "These are the codes. Just copy them here," he said, flipping to a blank page in his ledger. "If the chalk breaks, there's more in my satchel." She traced one of the marks with her fingertip, recognizing it wasn't from her own written language, but simple enough to copy. She began without further instruction, chalk whispering over the paper. Kale stepped back to check other incoming loads, speaking briefly with the dock clerks. Sel sat on a nearby crate, swinging her legs, her sharp eyes taking in everything, the ships, the workers, the crates that came and went. After a while, she leaned toward her mother and whispered, "That man with the shaved head. He brought 2 crates with the same number. One was already here." When Kale returned, she spoke up without hesitation. "We saw 3 crates with the same number." His brow rose. "Did we?" "Yes, he carried 2, and one was already here." Kale's mouth curved slightly. "Looks like you've got sharper eyes than me. That's useful." After 2 hours, he called it. "That's enough for today. You've already done more than most of the part-timers I get." Lyrian handed him the chalk. "You could have done this yourself." "I could have," he said, "but I wanted another set of eyes. If a crate's been tampered with, I'd rather catch it before it's unloaded." They walked back to the shed together. At the door, Kale handed her a small sack, 2 loaves of dock bread, a jar of pickled root, and a folded length of dry cloth. "Payment," he said. "I thought this wasn't paid work," she replied. "It's not, but if I eat while you go hungry, I'm the kind of man I don't want to be." She studied him a long moment before taking the sack. "No thanks," but no refusal either. Sel hugged the bread to her chest as Kale turned to leave. "Mama, can we keep him?" she asked with absolute seriousness. Kale chuckled once. "I'll be back tomorrow. Same knock." Lyrian watched him go, the sack warm in her hands, and for the first time in a long while, she wondered if staying might be safer than moving on. The next days blurred into a rhythm Lyrian hadn't felt in years. Mornings began with a muffled knock at the shed door, 3 fast. One slow and Kale standing there, coat dripping from the ever-present sea mist, carrying something small but necessary. Sometimes it was food, a paper-wrapped loaf still warm. From the dock ovens, a small tin of salted fish, or a bundle of root vegetables from a trader who owed him a favor. Other times it was practical things: extra chalk, a pair of gloves with the fingertips worn through, a strip of canvas to block the draft under the door. He never stayed long, and he never lingered at the threshold unless invited. Lyrian noticed that he seemed to understand that stepping into their space without her say was not a kindness, but a trespass. Sel, however, had no such reservations. She'd leap to her feet whenever he arrived, eager to see what he'd brought. The dock work came every few days, just as he'd promised, counting, marking, noting the scuffs and dents that might signal tampered goods. Sometimes Sel came along. Sometimes she stayed behind to help tidy the shed. Lyrian learned quickly, her handwriting crisp and consistent, even in the alien shapes of human trade codes. She also learned that Kale was trusted enough by the dockmaster to have certain blind spots overlooked, a fact that meant more than he ever said aloud. One night, the rain came hard and cold, rattling against the walls. Kale arrived late, his coat dripping, carrying a dented tin pot that steamed in the cool air. "Stew," he said simply, setting it down. Better hot than carried cold in the morning. The shed held the faint warmth from the warehouse wall, but the stew's heat filled it entirely, a slow drift of spice and salted meat. Sel was halfway through her first bowl before Lyrian even sat down. Kale took the other corner, resting his back against the wall. When they finished eating, The three of them stayed where they were, letting the heat sink in. Lyrian pulled the blanket over her legs. She hesitated for only a moment before letting it fall across Cale's shoulder as well. He didn't remark on it, just adjusted so they both fit beneath. The weight of the wool and the shared warmth made. The shed feels smaller, but not cramped. You walk the market every day, she said after a while, her voice low in the steady hush of rain. I told you, Cale replied. It shows me what the ledgers can't. And what's missing now? 2. Many people without dry ground under them. She studied his face in the dim light, searching for the pity she'd seen in so many others. She didn't find it only the same steady watchfulness he'd had since the first day. They didn't speak much after that. Sel curled up against the warm wall and drifted to sleep, her boots set neatly side by side. Lyrian stayed awake longer, feeling the slow, even rise of Cale's breath beside her, the quiet anchor of his presence. When she finally lay down, she realized she hadn't thought about where they might go next in days. The thought of leaving felt less like freedom now, and more like loss. The morning broke bright and flat, sunlight glinting off the wet cobbles. The market was quieter than usual, the lull between trawler arrivals, but the smell of salt and tar still hung heavy in the air. Cale's knock came as it always did, 3 fast, 1 slow, and when Lyrian opened the door, he was holding a small wooden crate under one arm. Shipment came in early, he said. Dockmaster won't miss a few things. Inside the crate were a folded wool blanket, a tin of preserved fruit, and a plain cotton shirt in her size. He set it just inside the door, instead of handing it to her directly. For you, he said. She ran her fingers over the wool, the texture soft against skin that had grown used to rough cloth. Why, it wasn't about the shed, Cale said quietly. It was about you. Lyrian studied him, her eyes narrowing. I didn't trust you at first. You weren't supposed to, he said. Trust isn't given, it's earned. Sel was perched cross-legged on the canvas floor, peering into the fruit tin like it might vanish if she looked away. Mama, she said, it smells sweet. Lyrian's hands stilled on the blanket. She looked up at Cale, her gaze softer now. It means something, what you've done here. He shook his head. It means I fixed a door before the next storm hits. Can maybe. I stopped pretending people land in safe places by accident. Her lips curved faintly at the corner. You don't make this easy to argue with. Good, he said, the word almost a smile. For a moment, the air between them carried only the muted noise of gulls outside. Then, as if making a decision she'd been turning over for weeks, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool against his palm, the grip firm. She placed his hand gently over her stomach. Not for me, she said, her voice steady. For a small one. The meaning hit him slowly. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The muscles in his jaw worked, but no words came for several heartbeats. Then, quietly, you didn't take anything from me, Lyrian. You gave me something. From the blanket, Sel's voice piped up, innocent and direct. Are you holding Mama like that? 'Cause I'm gonna have a brother or sister? Cale kept his hand where it was, his other resting lightly against Lyrian's side. Yeah, he said softly. And you'll be the first one they look up to. Sel nodded as if given an important task. I can do that. Lyrian didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. The 3 of them stayed close in the dim shed, the smell of salt and rope oil drifting in from the docks, the warmth from the warehouse wall seeping into the floor. Outside, the colony's noise went on as always, but inside, the air felt still anchored. She had been offered safety before. Food, shelter, a bed inland. But it had come with prices she refused to pay. She had chosen the rain, the cold, the uncertainty. Until Cale, And though she had never said the words, she knew he understood. She was choosing him now. For the first time since the storms had taken everything, the shed didn't feel like a place to wait out the weather. It felt like home.